and I'd firstly like to welcome you to the Summer Solstice Social Work Services Committee, the first of the new council. There's new members here, there's returning members here, so I suppose I'd like to thank the custodianship of the previous chair and vice chair of this committee of the old council, but we've got business for this committee, so I think without further ado we'll press on with Sederunt apologies.
Good afternoon. We have 18 members present. We are quorate, and I haven't received any formal apologies so far. Not present are Councillor Karen Crothers, Councillor Maitland and Councillor Tate. They may be along later in the meeting. Councillor Crothers.
There's actually David Ingalls is as well. Councillor Ingalls is an apology, and the other two from the Conservative group, certainly Councillor Crothers and Councillor Tate, are also apologies. Chairman, thanks for that.
Okay, noted, thank you.
I should say, I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be recorded and that the recording will be subsequently made available for public listening. Done. Okay, do we have any declarations of interest? No, thank you. Now, the reason why we're a wee bit late was just we were checking something in relation to Disclosure Scotland, so I think it might be helpful for Lillian, Chief Social Work Officer, maybe to add a few words on that, just to put everybody's mind at ease.
Thank you, Chair. Just to advise members that there was a request with regards to the previous requirement for members to be PVG'd to sit on Social Work Committee. Members will be aware that the legislation has changed. PVG is no longer a legal requirement. This is done under Disclosure Scotland, and you can only be subject to that disclosure if you work directly with children who are vulnerable or adults who are vulnerable, and consequently Disclosure Scotland would not accept that elected members would be part of that scheme. So it's just for clarity.
Okay, if we're happy with that, we'll move on to item 3, which is the Delegation to Social Work Services Committee. This report is basically to provide information on the delegations to this committee as agreed by full council on the 23rd of May 2017. We're actually being asked to note the remit of the Social Work Services Committee as detailed. Are there any questions? Councillor Crothers.
Thanks, Chairman. Not so much a question, I'll probably bring it up in the next report more so, but in regards to the delegation, just especially for the new members as well, we're looking at the members' induction at the next report as well, and it's just taken into context, there's a relationship obviously between the Health and Social Care Integrated Joint Board and our remit here as a Social Work Services Committee. I just wonder whether this is the appropriate time or maybe at the next one. Just ask Lynn to say a few words in regards to that relationship. I'm getting a lot of questions around that from my own group. What does it actually mean? So whether this is the right agenda item or maybe the next one would be better, Chairman. Appreciate a bit of advice on that.
Thanks, it's a good question, and I think, as you say, it'll probably come up more in relation to item 4 in terms of the induction. I mean, the remit is effectively set out in this report, but I think you raise a good point, and for the benefit of new and returning members, because there's been a lot of changes, I'll pass over to Lillian.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Crothers. Thank you, Chair. Just to advise Social Work Committee members that we are required, in terms of delegated adult services, to report to the Integrated Joint Board, and that would be the mechanism for the overview and strategic pathway for adult services. In terms of children's services, we are required to report to the Children, Young People and Lifelong Learning. And certainly for members of Social Work Committee, in terms of the delegated authority to make decision on adult services, we are not in a position to do that. That is for the IJB to make the decisions, but we can take, through the elected member representation, we can take areas identified by this committee back to the IJB. Clearly there will be some areas of conflict when we report first to Social Work Committee with regards to items that will also go to SIPL and will go to full council. So it's quite a difficult place to be as the Chief Social Work Officer, reporting to Social Work Committee, the IJB and the SIPL committees. And that certainly was an area that has been challenging in terms of governance, but clearly the decision was to continue with the Social Work Committee. And clearly our responsibility is to overview the social work service, but bearing in mind that in terms of delegated powers for adult services, it sits with the IJB, and ultimately for children's services and criminal justice, it will sit with the children, young people and lifelong learning.
Thanks, Lillian. Councillor Wood?
Thank you, Chair. It was to ask, under 3.2.2, will that include children that are placed from outside the area within our own region?
Councillor Wood, just to confirm that it's with regards to children that are not the responsibility of Dumfries and Galloway. Yeah. Clearly, in terms of reporting on those young people, children, young people, we can report to Social Work Service Committee some of the challenges that those young people will bring to the region if they're placed here by other local authorities from Scotland or indeed colleagues from south of the border. However, the responsibility remains with the host authority for those young people and children. I'm happy to come back if that doesn't answer the question.
Okay. Councillor McGregor? With that, I mean, if there are no further comments on this particular report, are we happy to note the remit of the Social Work Services Committee as is? Thank you. So item 4 then is the members' induction. You'll be getting familiar with this in all the committees you're attending at the moment. This report is basically outlining the proposals to support the induction or orientation of elected members of this committee regarding the services and operations within the social work service through a programme of briefings and events. And clearly, Councillor Carruthers has raised something that Lillian's answered, that we should be maybe taken forward in terms of the learning process for elected members in terms of accountability. But if there's any other questions or suggestions, now's the time. I'll open it to the floor. Councillor Sloan.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Thompson. On the integration joint board side of things, I know they are meeting, having a special meeting next week, which is it's a seminar. It's not a board meeting, and I think it would have been helpful for as many members as possible to be able to attend that and to sort of get to know the workings of the joint board.
I mean, it's an interesting point. I'm not sure how welcome we are, but maybe I'll defer to your knowledge of that, Lillian, in this case. Thanks.
Thank you for that point. I mean, any workshop that's run by the Health and Social Care Integrated Partnership, all elected members are invited to those workshops, and they do go on to the local authority elected members' diary. I wasn't aware there was a workshop next week, but I'm certainly happy to get the detail and share that with social work elected members. But there certainly is a board next week, and again, elected members are more than welcome to come and observe the board.
Thank you. Councillor Carruthers.
Just on the same subject, can you then tell me who the IGB answers to? Who do they report to?
Lillian, if you could help out with this one.
The IJB clearly are the Integrated Health and Social Care Partnership. The chair of the board is currently a non-executive member of NHS, and obviously the elected members' representation will be from the local authority, and there is a chief operating officer who is Julie White, who is responsible for the operational service delivery of health and social care integration.
You happy with that, Councillor Sloan? Okay, thank you. Councillor Carruthers.
I suppose just come back to the answerable bit as well, what Tommy's picked up in there. I mean, I think my understanding is a board within it's an authority within its own right, the board itself. So you've got Ombudsman, Scottish Government, so on and so forth, in which or even Standards Commission, if it comes down to behaviour of particular members of that board. I think the point I was going to raise was the very last bullet point under 3.71. I've raised consistently with the other one, just make sure that we do show a degree of flexibility in regards to groups, individuals, so on and so forth. But that one in particular, on top of that, was how do we actually monitor, how will we see it back to show that it's actually fulfilled the needs and requirements of individuals, groups, so on and so forth, elected members on the council?
Fair question. Lillian, would you like to add to that?
Thanks, Councillor Carruthers. Clearly from social work, we will take our steer from elected members in terms of we'll do some engagement following the end of the induction programme, and if there's further requirements for any element of the service, we're more than happy to facilitate either workshops, individual visits, site visits, or whatever's required. And also in terms of the IJB, there's certainly lots of opportunity to have some engagement and provide more information on the governance arrangements if required.
Councillor Nicholson.
Yeah, I suppose it's every individual councillor has got different needs, different, things that they might want to know or things that they don't know but they want to know, but they have a personal development plan for each individual councillor, and maybe that comes within that as well, and as well as individual services. Just one thing about the IJB, when I'm here, I might think that the IJB is autonomous as itself. It's a body within itself. We have a scrutiny role there. We have to look at the services that are being provided as well, even though we've no power to actually change the IJB's decisions. But the big thing in that, I would imagine, is the financial aspects as well. Financial aspects of the IJB, because it's more or less all the health services and it's adult services within social work. But within that, you've got all these different services, and you're quite right, you've got Julie there, who's in the middle, is the coup. She doesn't like being called that, by the way, Chief Operating Officer. And each individual department within that, it's like a circle of departments, and if they're short of money, then they can go to Julie, and she'll see if there's, pots or money not being used in certain aspects. The worry I have about that is, I've always had about that is that sometimes, it might be adult social services, for example, and I'm not saying it is, that have got, haven't spent some of that money, or the decision might be that they can take some money out of there and put it into another service, which they can justify by, whatever service that might be going into. But we haven't got a real grasp of that, at least I haven't. And something like that might be valuable as well, so we actually know how all these things work.
Well, thanks, Councillor Nicholson. I think that echoes some of my own sentiments in terms of being able to understand exactly how that financial and accountability relationship works. Councillor Dempster.
I think, Chair, the simple thing would be to organise a seminar or an information session for social work members, so that they can then get a better understanding of how the IJB works. As members have explained, it's complex. You'll not learn it in half a day anyway, but at least it'll give you an understanding, because otherwise you'll sit and ask questions periodically throughout the term of this committee. And we have, over the piece, I would imagine, some pieces of work to do, and it'd be better if members got an understanding early of what the IJB does and what our contribution to it is.
No, that's very well put, and I think Lillian's got a note of that. So, are there any other inputs into what we need to consider in terms of additionality to this member induction? Or are we happy to agree that this... Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Chair. As a newly elected member, it struck me when I was reading the Complaints Review Panel reports, which will be discussed later in the meeting, that it would have been helpful to have had some sort of overview of the investigation process and the review process. They're quite difficult reports to work through, certainly as a new member. I wonder if that could be incorporated into the training.
Yeah, thank you. Lillian, a response to that?
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. I'll certainly take those points on board. I have to advise, however, that the whole complaints review process for social work complaints has changed from the 1st of April 2017. And these outstanding CRPs are under the old system, but I'd certainly be more than happy if it would be helpful to share with you the new process for dealing with social work complaints.
Now, if there's nobody else, are we happy to go then with the recommendations 2.1 and 2.2? Yep. Item 5 is the non-residential community care charging policy for 2017-18. This report is actually asking us to approve a number of amendments to our non-residential community care charging policy. and financial assessment process for 2017-18. Obviously, we've been asked to agree a number of things here, but I'll throw it open to the committee if there's any questions. Councillor McGregor.
Thank you, Chair. It's in relation to 3.10, the charging policy, and if they fail to inform us, they won't be backdated to the point where the problem started. Is there a mechanism for appeal with that, just in case people have genuine reasons for not informing you in the first instance, I suppose?
I'll take that question just now, Lillian, if you want to.
The short answer, Councillor McGregor, is yes. But I think it would be important if Angela or Sean just give you a background on that process, if that would be helpful.
Councillor Nicholson.
I think that was part of it, but you know, when I was reading this report, I don't know what actually proactively what we do. Just now, as I understand it, you know, we backdate the money from whenever this person's circumstances change. What we're trying to do here is we're trying to just give them money from when they inform. But it's individual capacity of the person and whether that's taken care of within that structure. What happens just now is do we actually regularly have a conversation with the carers or with the individuals to see what circumstances they are in at that moment in time? Or does this just come to light during the annual assessment from us?
Thanks, Ronnie. I'll maybe bring Sean in here to maybe explain a wee bit more in detail about how the process actually works and why it needs to change.
Thank you, Chair. This backdating issue is more is to close a loophole we have in our current policy. And it's, as you know, people get an annual assessment, so any issues should be picked up annually. And we send out to people, we ask them for their capital, we ask them their charges to confirm what we are saying they should be charged. We also have the debt collection process, which looks every couple of months at people's outstanding debt, and we go to these people and to say, is there an issue? That's another opportunity for them to come back to us and say, I think my charge is wrong. If they believe the charge is wrong, they say to ourselves, and we will rework through their calculation based on their income, based on their capital. If they're not happy with that, and it's another issue, then they'll follow through our sort of second stage, which is go to the sort of locality manager to look for sort of financial poverty type issues. This particular change is in our policy. It really leaves us open to cases of deprivation where potentially somebody's been paying their charges. We've written to them, told them their charge, we've financially assessed them annually, and they've just ignored that and accepted that is correct. 3-4 years down the line, they could come back to us and say, I actually don't have that money anymore, and I want my charges all back for the last 3 or 4 years, which, had they let us know as we went along, we would have reassessed, but quite clearly they've not been in financial difficulty because they've been paying their charges. So it's really just a small change that we've discovered during the year. I have to admit, it very rarely comes up. I think there's only been one instance in the last couple of years where that has been the case. So it's really just to close a loophole. As you know, our policy is there to try and be as fair as we can. So we will always look at all considerations. And really, it's an aim at trying not to open previous financial years because it can become very complex and very time-consuming to look at. But if it was a genuine case where that person was wrongly charged, then we would still open it up and refund them if we believed that it was a genuine case.
Councillor Nicholson, do you want to come back?
It kind of partially answers my questions, but it kind of contradicts it some way. You're saying, you know, people going back and maybe claiming for 4 years, if you're doing an annual assessment, that shouldn't happen. Or within that year itself, you know, you talked about people not bothering with it. It's a capacity for actually doing that, that, you know, I'm a bit concerned about whether they have the capacity or the carers maybe don't have the capacity or the knowledge how things work or whatever, or whether we should be proactively within that period. I know you said something about 2 months of that, we have different things, but that still doesn't take care of the capacity of the individual.
If Councillor Nicholson, if I let Lillian come in on that first, just to try and address that.
Councillor Nicholson, in terms of when we undertake the yearly review, we would have a look at the capacity, and if it's a vulnerable adult, then clearly we would be engaging with all aspects of that vulnerable adult to ensure that they fully understand and that we engage with carers, etc., to make sure that we have the appropriate information. We do, however, unfortunately have some service users that refuse to provide us with information, particularly in terms of capital. So it's important for us to try and assess and look at the benefit income. But sometimes we do have situations where people, for whatever reason, choose not to fully engage with us. But couldn't say that it would never happen, but we would be confident that in terms of dealing with vulnerable adults who have capacity issues, that we would be able to ensure the appropriate assessment was undertaken.
Councillor McGregor.
Thank you, Chair. It's just on the back of that, and I entirely agree with Councillor Nicholson's questioning, because I think it's really important to get to the bottom of it. There are an awful lot of honest people out there who, when they get a bill through, particularly elderly people that are vulnerable, will pay it and not question it. So I suspect that, you know, whether they have money or not, they will endeavour to pay it, and I think that has to be taken into consideration. Fundamentally, how many people are we talking about per year, and what's the cost saving to the council by implementing this? I mean, how much money are we actually talking about? Because if it's pennies, then I can't agree to it. But if it's, you know, I have to understand what implementing this particular policy will save the council.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor McGregor. I mean, I think it would be probably helpful to see what it actually amounts to in terms of pounds and pence. Sean, is that something you can answer?
Really, we're probably talking about 2 cases in the last 2 years, which I think you were talking about potentially up to £40,000. And that was, you know, where we would see that as a kind of sort of deprivation issue. They should have let us know on an annual basis. They had capacity, but you can't predict when it can happen. But as I say, it very seldom happens. This is really just to align ourselves with other councils, because it actually came up at a Social Work Scotland Resources issue where we were one of the only organisations who would open up our books into previous years. And it's similar to how other organisations work, but it very rarely happens. If we get our financial assessment process right, which we believe we have got, this won't come up. And it's very much verifying people's income and verifying their capital. We look for evidence. If we don't have evidence, we won't charge somebody unless we have that.
Councillor Dempster.
It's just the usual daft laddie question. Where is it where social conscience? I mean, if these folk have genuinely overpaid us, why should we not give them their money back? And there is also the risk of adverse publicity and legal challenge.
Okay, do you want to maybe try and address that, Lillian?
Absolutely, Councillor Dempster, accept that is a situation. However, it is that difficult tightrope that we walk in terms of if we've given every opportunity to share the relevant information and we've supported those service users to give us accurate information on a yearly basis, then I think we have fulfilled our duty to try and engage and make sure that for those service users that do have changes to their circumstances, that we've got that information to make the relevant assessment. But I absolutely accept that it is it's a difficult situation sometimes.
Obviously, we've had a few questions there on the backdating issue, but are there questions in other aspects of the report, or are we happy to go to the Councillor Nicholson?
Not so much a question, is what was brought up before about the IJB. I mean, obviously, you know, what charges and what the IJB makes decisions in adult services within this, and you know, it's time to get a handle on all that for everybody in the Social Work Committee.
Councillor Nicholson, the responsibility for setting charges lies with the local authority. They certainly deliver the operational services, but it is the local authority's delegated responsibility to set the charges. And again, we can certainly provide a briefing note for members to just clarify that point.
I think that would be helpful. Councillor Carruthers, you wanted in? Thank you.
Thanks very much. It is complicated, the IGB stuff it is. But just what I'm trying to understand, because this actually came up a few times in the doors, it had never, through both the council and general election campaigns for myself, and it had never come up before. So clearly this type of charging policy is becoming certainly more of an issue in regards to the council and our residents in Dumfries and Galloway. But this is just a particular point that I will pick up on, and it came on in the council election, but then again after the Conservative manifesto, if I'm correct, I'm picking up on the right point, when it was released within a short time. And it's about devolved powers, and again going back to even further devolved, where this is actually a local charging policy. But on page 30, just so I'm sure, it's C6 and C7 in particular. And it just, so I've got a clear understanding of what that means, because I understand that there is a cap, and to put that into context, I got approached by a few constituents who were quite aggrieved at the fact that it's worked hard, saved hard the whole lives, and it got to a point where one constituent in particular, where his wife had vascular dementia, and a lot of money set aside, and ultimately that money was got to be spent on care for his wife and possibly himself, and he'd actually had his own agenda, his own legacy we wanted to leave it to his family, and so on and so forth. But is that 24750? Is that a cap? Is that the cap in Scotland? So because there was a mixture, I just need to kind of understand, because there was obviously a manifesto promise that came out, then it was then taken back, and so on and so forth. That'll come to the bottom of it at some point. Am I on the right point when I see that? Is that the cap?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Councillor Carruthers. What I'll do is I'll hand you over to Sean just to clarify. So this is C6 and C7 on page 30 in terms of the capital disregards.
Yeah, and I think 7 in particular.
Okay.
Thank you. The upper capital threshold of 24,750 is basically where somebody will come into full charge. So we let somebody keep 24,750 of capital. The lower capital disregard of 15,250, you'll pay £1 for every £250 you have between that amount, and anything below 15,250 there's no charge. Our charging policy is actually more generous than the rest of the local authorities who have a lower threshold of 10,000 and an upper of 16,000. So we still are more generous in this particular area. But when it comes to, it's probably quite important to remember we'll have free personal care in Scotland. So mainly for that group, most of their care will be free personal care. So they probably won't get as much of a charge anyway. That's what those
Thanks very much for that, Chairman. That was my basic understanding, what's been relayed, and I just want to make sure that was the correct, so I can always refer back to this document in future. But certainly that's what I tried to relay on the doors as well to some individuals. But I could understand where they're coming from. Work hard, save hard. Next thing you've got to spend all your money on your care. But anyways, that is where we are at this particular moment in time. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Sloan, you wanted in.
Thanks. Yeah. I noticed reading in the paper that the IGB are facing significant cost pressures in 17-18. Does this mean we're expecting them to come to look for the local government to make an increase?
Well, I'll pass it over to Lillian. I'm not sure if it's directly going to impact on what we've been asked to do here today, but Lillian, do you want to maybe add to that?
At this moment in time, Councillor Sloan, I wouldn't be able to provide an answer. We would have to wait and see whether the IGB, what the situation was at the end of the financial year.
Hold it. Sorry, Ronnie, I'll let you in if your microphone there.
It's just
Yeah.
on that same point, and that's probably why I was, what I was talking about, because it's a paragraph in the paper actually that says about the adult services within IGB are facing significant cost pressures. That's due to cost implications. Now, and that goes back to my point about these cost pressures and that, whether they can come to us, they can come and they can ask for more money from us. They can do that, and I think we've got an obligation to give them it, but I'm not too sure about that. Maybe Lillian will tell me. But the cost pressures they face, and I think that's why we need to get this understanding about all the other services within the IGB and where we stand within that and what happens, because it's very easy to, for some money to be diverted from one service to another and then have a cost pressure in that service because you haven't got enough money. And I'm not saying that'll happen, but it's just for, for peace of mind, if you want, that what happens, and we've got a full understanding of how that's taken care of.
Okay, well, given that it's clear that this understanding the IJB is fairly critical to how we place ourselves in relation to that, I think maybe any input in that might be helpful, especially on paragraph 3.5, I think it was you're referring to.
Clearly, we'll take the action to get more information out to elected members. However, absolutely under the legislation, the IJB, the partnership can come back and ask the local authority for assistance if there was significant financial difficulties. However, I think it's important that members are aware that we have worked very closely with our colleagues, and we do have a finance officer who furnishes the integrated partnership, and I would be confident that we would be coming back with an early warning to social work and indeed to full council, were that to be a situation where we feel that we would be coming back to the local authority via the partnership. At this moment in time, clearly we have a significant amount of savings to be identified through the partnership process, and we have been working closely with our colleagues in the Health and Social Care Partnership to ensure that the adult services are continuing to be delivered through this very difficult period. However, it would be important that I bring an early warning to elected members where we to be given information that may be an occurrence as we move through this financial year. At this moment in time, we've not been given that indication, and clearly it will be a financial paper at the Integrated Joint Board, which the 5 elected members from the local authority would be present and could challenge some of that. But at this moment in time, there's not an indication. Whilst it's difficult and it's a challenging settlement, at this moment in time we have processes in place to make sure we balance the budget.
Thanks, Lillian, and I think Angela's no. Okay, I'll let you in to say a couple of words anyway.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to give assurance that the budget has been set with IJB for 17-18, and there is a requirement to deliver on that budget. And as Lillian said, there are safeguards in place to alert us to the fact if that's not happening, but currently we have no indication that that will be the case.
You want to come back on the same point, Ronnie? Yeah.
I'm not going to belabor this point, but I think it just shows that, you know, the debate and that, and it's getting these reassurances, but, you know, we've got to understand what that actually means within the services. And he talked about you've got 5 councillors on the IGB, but they're not councillors when they're in the IGB. They're members of the board when they're in the IGB, so they're not in there speaking as councillors, they're there speaking for the IGB. It's like a Swestrans scenario, whereas, you know, you're there, you were put in there by the council, but you're not there as councillors. You're there for the...
No, I mean, I think it's clear that this is what we need in terms of briefing, but I'll let Councillor Wood in just now. I think you had a question.
Thank you. It's really clarification. Sean said at an earlier stage there that there wouldn't be any persons adversely affected regards the charging. Yet on page 28 and 7.3, non-payment of charge and debt recovery, it talks about an individual who refuses or fails to pay a charge for a service provided to meet his/her assessed social care needs will continue to receive that service. The council will, however, seek to establish any reasons for non-payment, and in consultation with the respective social work manager, take appropriate action for debt recovery. Couldn't we get clarification exactly what that means?
Is that one for you, Angela, to maybe address? Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Councillor Wood, I don't think we did say that any individual wouldn't be adversely affected. So if somebody was in the position where we weren't to backdate, then they would clearly be adversely affected. But we're saying the numbers of those people have only been 2 in the past 2 years.
Okay, thank you.
And Councillor Carruthers again.
To be very brief, I just think this committee is fortunate it has 3 voting members of the IGB that sits on this committee, taking on board what Councillor Nicholson said, that when they sit on there, they are actually members of the IGB, and that's where their heart lies at that moment in time. But I think if there's any real cause, we've got the reassurance to the Chief Social Work Officer, along with the Financial Officer, Section 95 Officer, and the elected members that sit on the council, and 3 of them, like I say, which actually sit on this committee. I think we're fortunate that way in regards to any potential risk, financial risk to the council.
Right, okay, if there's, Councillor Sloan.
Just a very brief point, Chair. I mean, I notice and welcome the fact that within this paper it highlights possible pressures that could come on these services. Has the Scottish Government been also made aware of these pressures?
I mean, I'd imagine the Scottish Government would be aware of pressures. Lillian, is there anything you'd like to add to that? Again, I mean, I'm wanting to try and bring this to the business here in terms of what we're able to decide, but would you like to comment on that, Lillian?
Clearly from the social work profession, there's representation from Social Work Scotland, which is the national body with regards to the budget settlement for social work services.
In terms of the report that we're being asked to consider, Gail, is this one that you want to actually ask in the report? Yeah. You wish to move the recommendations?
No.
Right.
No,
Okay.
I will speak on the recommendations though, if it would be helpful.
Okay, well, I was going to go to recommendation 2.1, which is to increase over 60s income allowance in line with Department for Work and Pensions. Are we happy to agree that? Yeah. And 2.2, to remove the war pension from the income consideration for considered for charging. Happy to do that? Okay. For 2.3, what we've been asked is obviously there in the recommendation. Gail, you want to come in at this point?
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. I personally can't agree to 2.3 at this stage. It doesn't sit well with me that whether it's 2 or 200 people, there could be a financial detriment to them because of a backdating process. And it is their money at the end of the day. For whatever reason, they've ended up overpaying and it hasn't been picked up. But, you know, that's a blame game. It could be the council's fault, it could be their fault. But at the end of the day, it's their money. And if it was a bank that was doing this, we would be up in arms and we would be absolutely furious about it. I don't want to be argumentative or push things to a vote. So I wonder if we just remove 2.3 at the moment, bring back a future report, and if it has to be confidential, so be it. Because obviously there's individuals involved. But I need to better understand why these payments were not made, or rather why they were made and why they were not picked up quicker to allow me to determine whether we should implement this policy or not. That would be my recommendation, but I'm very happy to listen to other members.
I mean, okay, I mean, I take your point. Okay, so we've got, do you have a seconder for that motion, by the way? Okay, what I'll do is I'll ask Sean, if possible, to maybe clarify a little, because I think the nature, the actual sort of question you're referring to, the suggestion is around the detail that you maybe need in order to make a better informed decision.
Yeah, just to interject before Sean comes in, I think the difficulty is that we're in a public meeting that's being recorded and we have two individuals where there's probably very sensitive information or confidential information that we shouldn't be discussing in this forum. So I don't want to cause any problem for those two particular individuals. But I need to be absolutely certain that we're not going to leave people in the future in financial detriment by, you know, imposing this policy on them. I mean, it's £40,000. That's a lot of money to a lot of people. And it's two people that would be have a future detriment should they find themselves in that situation again, or others like them. So I'm not comfortable with imposing this policy at this stage.
Okay, I mean, obviously the report's anonymised and it doesn't sort of identify. Yeah, okay. Councillor Crothers.
I just wonder, would it worth doing just deferring 2.3 for a report to the next committee, and it's up to the appropriate officer in regards the appropriate officer in regards to whether it should be confidential or not. But I think taking on board what Gail's saying, in fact, she'd like to see quite a detailed amount of information, if that's the case. And ultimately, I think the question comes to what is the risk to the council in future years, and how is that compared to the impact on individuals and their personal circumstance? That's what I'm certainly hearing, Chairman, as far as this is concerned. So, I mean, if we could defer it and see a report coming back, it will only potentially either take it off the table for the next couple of months, and it'll be either re-implemented at that time, or we'll have further information, we can look at it revisited, and there'll be a different way forward. We certainly talk about it in a group setting as well in between times, Chairman. So it might only slow it up for 2 or 3 months, or they might actually say, okay, we'll come back with a different type of policy. But take on board what Sean said earlier in regards to what's agreed at national level, what other local authorities do, and so on and so forth. They seem to be behind the game, but if we could defer it, at least it gives us a chance to look at it properly at a future meeting with further detail as Gail's requiring.
Okay, I mean, I think there's clearly an interest in getting the full facts, I suppose, in order to make a decision in terms of how this fits in with policy. I'm not clear that we have a requirement to make this, but I understand where it's really been asked to close a loophole in line with other practices. I would quite welcome the views of other members. I mean, as it stands as a recommendation here, do we want to pursue this today? Are there any other comments to add? Yep, okay. In that case, if members are agreed, we can defer this and get a report back with fuller information.
One question, Chair. What exactly do you want in relation to information? Because there's no point in getting information and 2 months later and saying, well, that's not what we looked for. We'll defer it again because at some stage we're going to have to reject the proposal by the officer or some way establish a mechanism that he and Angela can work from. So we need to know what it is members want to know that they don't currently know and how soon we get that information. Or it's not worth deferring it.
Sorry. Gail, could you maybe be explicit about the information you're meaning?
I'll be very explicit. I think fundamentally we need to understand why they were overcharged in the first place, what mechanism caused that, how long it had been for, why it wasn't picked up sooner, and understand whether the fault lies with the council or with the individual, or what financial assessment was involved with those particular individuals. Because I need to understand why it's been allowed to drag on for so long and then somebody's potentially owed £20,000 back. You know, what caused that breakdown in taking money from people and then 2 years down the line having to pay it back. So I need full information about the process that got to that stage.
So, okay, so I think what we're saying there is effectively I know this recommendation here is effectively to sort of close that loophole, but it's really to understand the context in which a loophole needed to be closed. So how effective are our processes, how well are they applied, how are people's cases being reviewed, etc. Okay, I mean, Councillor Dempster, if you want to maybe come in on that.
Sean told us it was because people won't engage with the service and they only provide their financial information to allow us to make an accurate assessment. So we know that. It's how we make sure that doesn't happen again that might be the challenge. And no, we already understand, because everyone in the room knows they were told without being given detailed information. It's lack of information from the user that's the problem. And you won't fix that by deferring it.
Councillor Murray.
There's two specific cases which it's dragged on for a very long time, but the proposal is that the backdating should only be effective from the time the change is notified or within a calendar month. So there could be quite a lot of other smaller cases where somebody maybe has been backdated 2-3 months, may not be a big sum of money as far as the council is concerned, but a significant sum of money as far as that individual is concerned. So I would really like to know more, not just about the two very significant cases, but are there a lot of other people who might be caught on fairly small claims for backdating, which actually could be affected and have a significant effect on them, even if it isn't a big effect on the budget of the department.
No, I mean, I think the point was made whenever the officer was explaining that this was often to do with reopening the books from previous years, for example, but setting it to a month, obviously, as you've said, I mean, we don't yet know or can't give any quantum or quantity to what that impact that might be for a lot of individual people who would be affected with that. So, Councillor McClelland.
Yes, Chair. I would like to just understand as well, before a decision is made on this, what the legal rights of the individual is. If there has been an overpayment, that individual must surely have a legal right, and I think we are potentially, I understand we're trying to close a loophole, but what's the legality of this?
I'll hand over to Lily on this just to give a politically expedient answer.
Thanks, Councillor McClelland. Certainly, if members chose to defer this 2.3, we could include that information within the overview report.
Councillor Carruthers, final word on this.
Just, I mean, the 2 points for me, but the highlight points is the potential financial risk that we may incur, or there may be savings there, depends on which way you want to look at it, and the potential reputational damage to the council if it was to go wrong. So that's the two really important parts I think we have to consider as well.
And Councillor Wood, very final word.
Yeah. I was just thinking that in future when we get reports like this coming forward, maybe this is a situation whereby if we'd had a proper impact assessment presented as well. I know it states there's no requirement, but I do wonder that when you have a change of this calibre, that we should in actual fact incorporate that within the report.
Okay, that's noted. So, I mean, taking on board the views, I think the mood of the committee is to remove item 2.3. Yep, well, to bring, because effectively we're going to need more information to actually make that decision. And so for 2.4 then, finally, to increase awareness among our service users that we consider disability-related expenditure in line with our charging policy, detailed paragraph 3.13. Are we happy to agree that? Yep. Thank you very much. Okay, report 6 is appointments to outside bodies. We've got a number to agree here, and hopefully it'll be a more collegiate atmosphere than it was yesterday at EEI, where we had to vote on every single one. But, so firstly, we're asked to appoint 2 members to Alcohol and Drug Support South West Scotland, as detailed at 3.6. Could I take any nominations? Councillor Campbell Douglas.
I'll nominate Councillor John Campbell.
And do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Wood, thank you. We're asking for 2 members. Are there any other nominations? Okay, just as a point of process, obviously we've been asked to appoint here. I'm not sure we actually necessarily need to fill, because a lot of these are by invitation, but there's obviously certain things we'd like to show our elected member representation on. But in the meantime, are we okay to appoint just 1 member?
Through you, Chair, yes, this is an invitation, so you're not required to fill every post up to 2. So yes, 1 member is appropriate if the committee agrees.
Councillor Dempster.
In the event any volunteers, are we able to offer the position to other members of the council who might be interested but don't necessarily serve in Social Work Services Committee?
That's a good question. I think I tried to do that yesterday. Are we able to do that?
But some of them are statutory. This might not be, especially if Lucy says it's by invitation.
Are you able to provide any guidance on that?
I would have to go back and double check, but I don't think so. I think because it's just at the Social Work Committee it falls under, so I could find out.
I think for the purposes of today, we'll take the appointment for those who can, and then if there's, if we can come back to it and revisit it as it. Okay, thank you. So in that case, we have nominated Councillor Campbell for one of the positions. For 2.2 then, to appoint 2 members to the Child Protection Committee, as detailed in 3.7. Historically, this used to be the chair and vice chair. I don't know if we have any alternative nominations or if we're happy to go with tradition. Thank you very much. In terms of 2.3, 3 members to the Dumfries and Galloway Area Support Team, as detailed at 3.8. Councillor McKee, I think you maybe had a couple of words to say on this one.
This area support team is in place of what used to be the Children's Reporters Committee. We used to attend, we used to work with the recruiting members into the children's panel and observe them at committee and things like that. That was being done away with, and we've now got this Dumfries and Galloway Area Support Team. As some of you may know, the last council, John Simon and myself attended, and I think we only attended 1 meeting, and it was basically a waste of time for councillors to be there. So what I'm seeking at the present moment is just for myself to take membership of that, and we're seeking a meeting with the officers from Edinburgh to justify the need for a representative or representatives from the council. As I say, at the present moment, and I believe other councils in Scotland are of the same view, that it's a total waste of time for us to go ahead with it. So I'd ask you to support myself in this instance, and subject to a response we get from the Scottish representatives, we'll let you know then whether we need additional support or whether we need any support at all.
Happy to agree that just now. Yep. Okay. 2.4 is to appoint 2 members to the Dumfries and Galloway Care Trust, as detailed at paragraph 3.9. Do we have any nominations for that? Councillor Campbell.
I would like to nominate Councillor Little.
Seconded by Councillor Dempster. Are you happy with that, Councillor Little? We're at 2.4. Okay. There's still a vacancy for another member if anybody's keen to take that on board. Not at this time. Okay. On 2.5, we're asking for 4 members to the Dumfries and Galloway Champions Board, as detailed at 3.10. I think in previous council it was 1 member from each area, and I think this is actually an important one where we should get the representation across the piece, given the Looked After Children forum that it is. Do we have nominations for this one? Councillor Crothers.
Certainly have one as Andrew Justy, Councillor Justy would be keen to take up one of these positions.
Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Wood, thank you. Okay, thank you. Any nominations for any of the other locality areas? Councillor McGregor, you're putting yourself forward. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Carruthers, thank you. Any other nominations? Councillor Little.
Again, I'd like to nominate myself for that one.
Okay, anybody want to second that? Councillor Wood, thank you. And do we have any for, that'll be Stewartry, I guess, the locality that hasn't been volunteered for so far. Are there any nominations for that? Well, maybe keep the space open for a councillor from the Stewartry in that case, but obviously Councillor Maitland isn't here today to speak to that. Okay, 2.6 then, appoint 1 member to the Older People's Consultative Committee as detailed at paragraph 3.11. Any nominations for that? Councillor? You'll nominate Councillor Dempster. Any seconder for that? No? Councillor Campbell.
I would like to nominate Councillor Dougie Campbell.
Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Murray, thank you. And also 2.7, 2 members to the permanency panel, as detailed in paragraph 3.12. Councillor Campbell.
I would like to nominate Councillor McKee.
Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Dougie Campbell. Now there are 2 members for that, so I don't know if we want to take them both up at this time. Are there any other nominations? Oh yeah, beg your pardon. Do we have a substitute member who's willing to take that on? Not at the moment. Okay, to appoint 1 member to the 2 members to the temporary fostering panel as detailed at 3.13. Councillor Little.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Dougie Campbell.
Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor John Campbell, thank you. Again, there's 2 members for that fostering panel. I mean, do we want to nominate anybody else today? No, okay. To appoint 1 member to the Dumfries and Galloway Alcohol and Drugs Partnership, ADP, as detailed at paragraph 3.14. Councillor Murray.
I'd like to nominate Ronnie Nicholson.
And do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Wood, thank you. And finally, to appoint one member to Dumfries and Galloway Women's Aid as detailed in paragraph 3.15. Any nominations? Councillor McKee.
At the present moment, I sit on the board of Women's Aid. I used to be the council representative, but things happened 5 years ago that such that I didn't sit on as a council representative, and I've been there ever since as an appointed, an outside a person not affiliated to the council. So we've got two options: we can get a second, or get a council representative, or for myself to stand as council representative. Leave it open to yourself.
Councillor Crothers.
Chairman, I just wonder, when I look through these, because there'll be some vacancies at the end of it. I wonder if we could have, it's a good idea what Councillor McKee's come up with, but I wonder if we could have, as a committee, delegated between yourself and the chair and the vice chair in regards to if nominations come forward from out with the committee, we can delegate that authority to yourselves just to agree them. So if it doesn't, if nobody else comes from out with, and I'm thinking Councillor Maitland lives in Stuartly, she might or might not be interested in this, but if she does declare an interest, then if she runs it past you two, you could actually sign it off. Is that an option, and it would go for the rest of them as well? Just thinking aloud, really, Chairman.
Okay, well, I'll seek governance advice on that.
I think, yeah, again, I have to go away and clarify that.
Point well made, but we'll find out and try and do the right thing. So, Councillor Nicholson.
Yeah, it's been done before, so I can't see any reason why not. It has been done before. And just on the 2.10, just to make it clean and clear, David proposed David for the council representative, where he should have been.
Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Murray, thank you. Next up, so item 7 is a minute for noting for the Dumfries and Galloway Adult Protection Committee. Are we happy to note that? Thank you. And item 8, the minute of the Dumfries and Galloway Child Protection Committee of 20th of February. It's just for information. Are we happy to note that? Thank you. I have no other business deemed urgent by the Chairman due to a need for a decision. So item 10 is Local Government Scotland Act 1973 to consider adoption of a resolution to exclude the public from the meeting in terms of section